Welcome to Zoe Stories. My cousin made me dress like a girl for a bet. My name is Ethan, and I'm 19 years old. I'm just your average college student, trying to keep up with my classes, friends, and the usual life stressors that come with being a young adult. I've never been one to go looking for drama. If anything, I prefer to keep a low profile, blending in, and focusing on what I can control. But life, as it often does, has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect them. It all started when my cousin Jack, who's 2 years older than me and has this way of pushing boundaries, made a bet that would completely flip my world upside down. He challenged me to spend an entire weekend dressed as a girl. At first, I thought it was just another one of his weird jokes. But when he laid out the stakes, $500 if I went through with it, I couldn't pass it up. My student loans were piling up, and $500 was a tempting offer I couldn't ignore. The idea of dressing as a girl didn't bother me at first. I mean, I'd worn costumes before, and it was just a bet, right? But the more I thought about it, the more something inside me started to stir. Was it really just about the money? Or was there something deeper going on here? The moment I agreed to the challenge, I realized this wasn't just a simple dare. It was going to force me to confront something I'd never even considered before, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what came next. When Jack first made the bet, it seemed like a joke, something goofy and harmless. But as soon as I said yes, the weight of the decision settled in, and I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in my stomach. Sure, $500 was a lot of money. It would help with rent, groceries, and all the other expenses I was drowning in. But dressing as a girl for an entire weekend? That was another story entirely. I kept picturing myself in a skirt and heels, walking around town, people staring, maybe even laughing. My palms started to sweat just thinking about it. I was a guy. A normal guy. Or at least that's how I saw myself. Dressing up as a girl didn't seem like a fun prank. It felt wrong, somehow, like I'd be crossing a line I couldn't uncross. But then the other part of me, the part that saw the cash, the part that was tired of living paycheck to paycheck, kept whispering, it's just a weekend. It's just a costume. Do it and move on. I couldn't stop imagining the embarrassment. What if people noticed? What if they thought I was some kind of freak? The more I thought about it, the more the nerves bubbled up inside me, making my stomach churn. Would I be able to pull it off? What if I looked ridiculous? But there was this strange, quieter voice, one that whispered things I wasn't prepared to hear. What if I felt free? What if I actually liked the way I looked in a dress? I wasn't sure if I was terrified of the consequences of backing out or of what would happen if I actually went through with it. The money was tempting, but what would it cost me in the end? The thought of looking at myself in a mirror and not seeing the person I'd always known was more unsettling than I cared to admit. But Jack had already won that bet. And no matter how much I hesitated, I knew there was no way out now. I was in too deep. The days leading up to the weekend felt like a slow, suffocating countdown. Every time I saw Jack, that smirk of his just reminded me of what I'd gotten myself into. I tried to distract myself, focusing on homework and hanging out with friends, but I couldn't shake the anxiety clawing at me from the inside. It wasn't just about the clothes or the bed anymore. It was about what this whole thing represented. Was this going to be some weird phase I could laugh off, or would it lead me down a path I wasn't ready to walk? I needed advice. I needed someone who could maybe talk some sense into me. So I decided to confide in Matt, my best friend since high school. We'd been through everything together. But the moment I told him, his eyebrows shot up, and I could see the concern in his eyes. You're actually going to do it? Matt's voice was almost disbelieving. I mean, it's just a bet, right? You're not really into it, are you? His words hit me like a punch. Am I into it? The question echoed in my mind, but I didn't have an answer. I shook my head, forcing a laugh. No, it's just a stupid dare. I'm not going to like it. I mean, who would? Matt looked at me for a long time, his eyes searching mine like he was trying to read between the lines. Ethan, man, if it feels wrong, you don't have to do it. No one's forcing you. The truth was, I did feel like I was being forced. The more I thought about it, the more pressure I felt to follow through. The whole idea of dressing as a girl felt alien to me, like it didn't belong in my world. But Matt's words stuck with me. What if I was making a mistake? What if I wasn't just doing this for the bet, but because there was a part of me that wanted to know what it would feel like? That part scared me more than anything else. Later that night, I found myself standing in front of my bedroom mirror, staring at my reflection, lost in thought. My mind was a blur of conflicting emotions, fear, excitement, shame, curiosity, and I couldn't make sense of any of it. How would I feel when I actually put on the clothes? Would it feel like a joke, or would something inside me shift? I had no answers, but there was no turning back. I had agreed to this, and the time was getting closer. Then, out of nowhere, a text from Jack popped up on my phone. It was short, almost taunting. "Ready for the weekend, cousin?" I stared at the message, my heart pounding in my chest. Was I ready? My mind raced. Would I be able to face the reality of this, or would I crumble under the weight of my own hesitation? The tension built like a pressure cooker, and I was starting to wonder just how much I could take before everything boiled over. The night before the weekend arrived, I lay in bed, my mind racing. My phone sat on the nightstand, still buzzing with messages from Jack, almost taunting, almost daring me to back out. But I couldn't. I'd made a promise, and there was something about the idea of losing that $500 that gnawed at me. It was too much money to pass up, especially when my financial situation was already a mess. And Jack would never let me live it down. But then there was the other side, the quiet voice that whispered in my mind that this wasn't just about money. It wasn't about a stupid dare anymore. It was about proving something to myself. Could I handle it? Could I really pull off the whole weekend, dressed as a girl, walking around in heels, playing the part without losing my mind? And more importantly, what would happen when I crossed that line? The fear started to take hold again, gripping my chest with tight fingers. What if it wasn't just a costume? What if it changed me? What if, after this weekend, I started questioning everything about myself? I took a deep breath, standing in front of the mirror. I could hear my heartbeat pounding in my ears. This wasn't just about a bet. This was about facing something that had been buried deep down. And no matter how much I feared it, I couldn't ignore it any longer. I grabbed my phone, my fingers shaking as I typed a quick reply to Jack. "Let's do this. I'm in." The decision was made, and now there was no turning back. I didn't know what awaited me, but I was about to find out. The morning of the bet, I could barely eat. My stomach was in knots, and I could feel the weight of the decision hanging over me like a dark cloud. I stood in front of my closet, staring at my clothes, my usual jeans and t-shirt, wondering how I'd go from this to whatever was on the other side of this bet. Jack had made it clear he was going to help me with everything. It was his idea, after all, so I knew I'd be relying on him. When I arrived at his place, he was already grinning, practically giddy with excitement. He led me into his room, where everything was set up: a skirt, a blouse, shoes, heels, of course, and makeup that looked more like a personal torture kit than anything else. The sight of everything sent a wave of panic over me. What am I doing? I thought. I was suddenly all too aware of my body, of how out of place I felt standing here. Jack didn't seem to notice. He was already pulling out the makeup, his hands moving quickly, as if he'd done this 100 times before. "Come on, don't worry, it'll be fun," he said, not giving me a chance to back out. I reluctantly sat down, and he started applying foundation, brushing it over my face in smooth, precise strokes. The coolness of the makeup on my skin was oddly soothing, though I hated how different it made me feel. Every swipe of the brush felt like a boundary being crossed, a transformation that was happening whether I liked it or not. The heels were the hardest part. They looked deceptively simple, black, modest, but the moment I slipped them on, I felt like I was teetering on the edge of disaster. The way my legs looked in them, the height that felt so unnatural, it made me feel exposed in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the clothes. It was how they made me feel, like I was wearing someone else's skin. A wave of embarrassment washed over me.
Who am I?
I couldn't answer the question. Not yet. Then came the wig. Jack slipped it on, adjusting it around my head. It was long and silky, dark brown with soft waves that fell just below my shoulders. When I looked in the mirror, I almost didn't recognize myself. The person looking back had soft features, a delicate jawline, and these big, wide eyes that seemed to glow with something I couldn't explain. My hair was smooth, not the messy mop I was used to. The reflection felt wrong, like a version of myself I didn't know how to handle. But as much as I hated it, a part of me couldn't look away. I was seeing myself in a way I'd never allowed before, and it was both fascinating and terrifying. Jack stepped back, grinning. "You look great." Seriously. The compliment hit me harder than I expected. I could feel my cheeks flush, and I caught myself standing up straighter, as if trying to own the new version of myself. For a second, I wondered if this was what it felt like to be someone else, to have a completely different identity. Is this how it happens? I thought. How people find themselves. But before I could think too much about it, Jack grabbed his phone and snapped a picture. "We've got to show this off. You're going to crush it." That thought scared me more than I cared to admit. Would I be able to crush it, or would I crumble under the weight of it all? The night was finally here, and I was standing in the middle of a packed party, surrounded by strangers who didn't know the truth. I had never felt more out of place, but somehow, the world around me had shifted. The music thumped in my chest, and laughter echoed in my ears as people danced and mingled. Jack was there, somewhere, with a proud grin plastered on his face. "Look at me, Ethan," he seemed to say without words. "You did it. You're pulling it off." But I wasn't so sure. The heels were killing me. My feet ached with every step I took, and I was terrified I'd trip in front of everyone. I could feel the weight of the wig on my head, the makeup on my skin, and the unfamiliar, constricting tightness of the skirt. But the worst part wasn't the physical discomfort. It was the suffocating sense of disconnection I felt for myself. It was as if I had put on a mask, and now I didn't know how to take it off. I caught my reflection in a mirror, and for a brief moment, I didn't recognize the girl staring back at me. She was tall, poised, confident in a way I never had been. The makeup, the hair, the clothes, everything about her screamed someone else. And then, like a punch to the gut, I realized that I wasn't just pretending anymore. I wasn't just following through on a dare. I had become this person, this version of myself I didn't know how to reconcile. A sudden hand on my shoulder snapped me out of my thoughts. It was Sarah, someone I had barely talked to before tonight, but now she was smiling at me with warm eyes, her voice sweet. "You look amazing," she said, her voice carrying a weight I wasn't expecting. Amazing. The word lingered in the air, and my heart skipped a beat. Was she just being polite? Or was there something more? I wanted to say something, anything, but my throat felt tight. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to laugh it off, to pretend this wasn't a big deal. But in that moment, the weight of everything crashed down on me. This wasn't just a game. It wasn't just a costume. The question hung in the air. Who am I, really? Sarah tilted her head, as if sensing my struggle. "You're good at this," she said, her eyes never leaving mine. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. Maybe she didn't know it, but those words were like a key, unlocking something buried deep down, a part of me that had been locked away and silenced for so long. I wasn't sure what it meant, but for the first time that night, I felt seen. And just for a fleeting moment, I didn't want to take the costume off. The night ended, but the impact of it lingered long after I slipped out of the heels and wiped off the makeup. As I stood in front of the mirror, seeing myself as I had always been, the reflection felt somehow distant, like I had been living in someone else's skin for just a moment, and now it was time to return to mine. But who was I really? Was I the guy who could never imagine wearing a skirt in public? Or was I the person who, for one night, had stepped out of himself and discovered a side he hadn't even known existed? I thought about Sarah's words, "You're good at this," and I realized that she wasn't just talking about the clothes or the makeup. She was talking about me, how I had transformed, not just physically, but in ways I didn't expect. That night had cracked open a door inside me. A door I wasn't sure I was ready to walk through, but now that it was open, I couldn't ignore it. The bet had started as a dare, something foolish to win money, but it had turned into something deeper. It had made me confront parts of myself that I had buried, parts that had always been there, but I'd never allowed myself to explore. The fear, the self-doubt, it hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. I wasn't sure where this journey would take me. Maybe it was just a one-off experience, a lesson in self-expression and vulnerability. Or maybe it was the beginning of something more. All I knew was that I wasn't the same person who had walked into that party. And whatever came next, I was ready to face it. Thank you for joining us on another captivating journey through Zoe's stories. Remember to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a tale. Until next time, keep exploring, keep imagining, and keep believing in the magic of storytelling. See you in the next chapter.